Something is about to break through in a way that cannot be ignored. And if you feel even the slightest tension building beneath your thoughts right now, you need to pay attention because this is not subtle anymore. On May 5th, within a matter of hours, Mercury forms a square with Pluto. And this is not a gentle interaction or a passing influence. This is one of the most psychologically intense alignments of the entire year. And what amplifies it to an almost overwhelming level is the timing it happens, exactly 17 hours before Pluto stations retrograde, which means the energy is not just active, it is concentrated, slowed down, pressurized to a point where it demands release. And if lately you have felt like something is forming under the surface, like a quiet but persistent pressure that you cannot fully explain, that is not in your head. That sensation is real, and it is collective, but at the same time deeply personal, because what is about to emerge is not random, it is tailored to what you have been avoiding. And here is the part that most people are not prepared for. They're going to move through this day expecting normalcy, expecting routine, and instead, they are going to be confronted with truths that interrupt everything. Conversations that expose what has been unspoken, realizations that shift their entire perception of who they are and who they have been surrounded by. And if you have noticed your thoughts becoming more intense lately, almost looping, almost obsessive, as if something deeper than your conscious mind is trying to get your attention, that is not coincidence. That is the beginning of this activation. And there is a reason for it that goes far beyond surface-level thinking. And I will take you deeper into that. But first you need to understand why this window of 48 hours matters so much, because what is happening now is not quiet anymore. The universe is no longer suggesting. It is confronting, and what is about to be revealed cuts directly into the core of your identity. It strips away the comfortable narratives and replaces them with something raw and undeniable. And to really grasp the magnitude of this, you have to understand the nature of the planets involved. Mercury governs your mental space, the way you interpret reality, the words you choose, the thoughts you repeat. It is the system through which you organize your world. But Pluto operates on an entirely different level. Pluto governs what is hidden, what is buried, what you have pushed so far down that you convinced yourself it was no longer relevant. It is obsession. It is transformation. It is the force that exposes what you have been unwilling to face. And when these two form a square, a 90-degree tension that forces action. It creates a situation where your conscious awareness is no longer separate from your unconscious truth. It is like being placed in a position where you cannot look away from your own shadow, and there is no comfortable distance, no way to intellectualize your way out of it. And what makes this moment even more intense is Pluto preparing to go retrograde, because when a planet stations, it slows down dramatically, almost as if time itself is pausing around it, and that creates a concentrated field of energy that holds everything in place. And then Mercury, moving quickly as it always does, collides directly into that still point, carrying your thoughts, your conversations, your perceptions straight into the core of what has been waiting to surface. And the result is not subtle. It is impactful. It is revealing. It is something you cannot ignore even if you try. And while not everyone will experience this in identical ways, if you are someone who feels energy shifts, if you have already been sensing the build-up over the past few days, then what is coming is not going to surprise you as much as it is going to confirm what you already felt beneath the surface, because this did not start today. It has been unfolding. The Scorpio full moon on May 1st was the opening. Scorpio, being ruled by Pluto, already deals with hidden emotional material, the parts of yourself you keep locked away, and that full moon acted like a key, bringing those buried emotions up, whether you were ready or not. And then came May 4th, when Mars squared Jupiter, intensifying everything that had already been stirred. Mars brings action, conflict, assertion, while Jupiter expands whatever it touches. So when they clash, Tension escalates small issues, become amplified. People become more defensive, more reactive, more determined to protect their perspective. And what you have now is a layered build-up emotional depth from the Scorpio full moon, followed by heightened reactions and conflict from the Mars. Jupiter square, and all of that is leading directly into this Mercury-Pluto collision, which is not here to create something new, but to reveal what has already been building beneath everything you thought you understood. And this is where things begin to shift in a way that you cannot reverse once you see it. Right at the peak of everything that has been building, right when the emotional intensity and the rising tension feel like they are almost too much to hold, Mercury steps into this exact point of pressure and collides with Pluto. And what happens next is not subtle. It is not gradual. It is a direct exposure of everything that has been sitting underneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be seen. And if you have been feeling restless, if you have been more easily irritated than usual, if there is this strange sensation like you are about to say something you have been holding inside for far too long, that is not random behavior. That is your mind reaching a breaking point where it can no longer contain what has been suppressed. And I want you to really sit with this for a second, because this is where it becomes deeply personal. This is not just about external events or other people revealing themselves. This is about you coming face to face with parts of your own truth that you have not allowed into your awareness. And I say that because I have felt it too. I have noticed thoughts rising that I have not visited in years. Reflections about past decisions, about relationships that did not feel right even when I convinced myself they did. About moments where I chose comfort over honesty with myself. And that is exactly what this transit does. It removes the protective layer that normally filters your perception, and it brings forward the raw, unedited truth. Not just about others, but about your own patterns, your own blind spots, your own internal contradictions. And this is where the first major revelation begins to unfold. The hidden motives are coming into the light, both yours and everyone around you. And what makes this so intense is the dynamic between Mercury in Taurus and Pluto in Aquarius. Because Mercury in Taurus wants stability above all else, it prefers what is familiar. It builds beliefs slowly, and once those beliefs are formed, it does not want to question them. It looks for confirmation rather than contradiction. It clings to what feels safe, even if that safety is built on incomplete truths. But Pluto in Aquarius operates on an entirely different frequency. It is not interested in preserving your comfort. It is not interested in protecting your existing narrative. It is here to reveal the larger pattern, the hidden systems, the underlying power structures that have been influencing your life without your conscious awareness. And when these two forces meet in a square, that tension creates a rupture. It forces the stable surface of your thinking to crack open so that what has been hidden underneath can finally emerge. And this is where something powerful, but also potentially disruptive, begins to happen. Your words start coming from a deeper place, almost like they bypass your usual filters. Conversations that once felt controlled suddenly become unpredictable. Things that have been unsaid for months or even years rise up and spill out in a way that cannot be contained once it begins. And this can feel shocking in the moment because it breaks the illusion of control. But at a deeper level, it serves a necessary purpose, because you cannot continue building your life on top of unspoken resentment, suppressed truth, or distorted perception. Something has to clear that space. Something has to remove what is false, so that what is real can take its place. And that is exactly what this alignment is doing. It is dismantling the stories you have been telling yourself, so that you can finally see what has actually been there all along. And what is fascinating is that this does not always come through dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it arrives quietly, almost subtly, like when you are scrolling through old messages and suddenly a pattern becomes obvious that you could not see before. Or when you are sitting in a conversation and you realize you no longer resonate with what is being said. even though you once did. And in that moment, something inside you shifts, not loudly, but definitively. And you understand that you have been participating in something that no longer aligns with who you are becoming, and that realization alone can change everything because it removes the illusion that allowed you to stay in that space. And now you see it clearly. And once you see it clearly, you cannot go back to not knowing. And this is where the energy can take on a shadow expression if it is not handled with awareness. Because there will be people who use this intensity to justify harshness, to speak in ways that are unnecessarily cutting under the excuse of honesty, to manipulate situations by claiming they are simply revealing the truth. And it is important for you to recognize the difference, because genuine truth does not need to harm in order to be valid. It does not need to diminish you or control you to prove its power. So if you encounter energy that feels aggressive, that tries to make you question your own reality in a way that feels disempowering, understand that this is not clarity. It is distortion, expressed through the shadow side of this transit. But if you are willing to turn this energy inward, to face what it reveals about your own behavior, your own choices, your own patterns of giving your power away or holding yourself back, then what you gain from this moment can be transformative in a way that permanently alters your path forward, and that leads directly into the second revelation which begins to surface at the same time. Because this is not only about your internal truth, it is also about the structures in your physical world that you have relied on to feel stable. And this is where it becomes even more tangible. Because Mercury in Taurus is connected to the material plane, to your routines, your resources, your body, your sense of security, everything that feels solid and dependable in your life. And as this energy unfolds, it begins to show you that even those structures are not as fixed as you once believed, and that realization is where the next shift begins to take shape. What you are being asked to confront now goes beyond thoughts and emotions and moves directly into the physical reality. You can actually touch the routines you follow every single day, the structures you depend on to feel grounded. Because Mercury in Taurus is not abstract. It is about what is tangible, what feels stable, what you rely on to function. But Pluto in Aquarius is not interested in maintaining those structures. It is here to completely transform them. Aquarius carries the energy of disruption, innovation, and radical reorganization. It challenges outdated systems and replaces them with something entirely new. And when Pluto applies that force through a square to Mercury in Taurus, the message becomes unavoidable. The way you have been operating is no longer sustainable. The systems you trusted are no longer aligned with where you are going, and what makes this so intense is that it does not arrive as a gentle suggestion. It arrives as a disruption that forces you to pay attention. And for many people, this is going to manifest through the body first, because Taurus governs the physical form. You may suddenly realize that the exhaustion you have been ignoring is not temporary, that the stress you have been carrying is no longer something you can push through, that your current lifestyle is not just uncomfortable, but fundamentally misaligned with your well-being, and that realization can feel overwhelming because it strips away the illusion that everything is fine. And at the same time, this can show up in the systems you rely on externally. The routines that once felt efficient begin to break down. The tools you use stop working the way they used to. Technology fails at the worst possible moments. Methods that once gave you structure now feel restrictive or outdated, and in that moment it is easy to label it as bad timing or frustration. But what is actually happening is far more precise. It is a signal that the foundation you have been building on is no longer capable of supporting the next version of your life. And Pluto does not operate through minor adjustments. It does not offer small fixes or temporary solutions. It initiates a full dismantling so that something entirely new can take its place. And I know how unsettling that can feel, especially if you are someone who depends on routine to create a sense of safety. Because when those routines collapse, It can feel like you are losing control, like everything you relied on is slipping away. But what is really happening is that you are being moved out of a version of stability that was built on limitation. Because over time it is easy to settle into patterns that only allow you to function at a fraction of your potential. You adapt to systems that keep you comfortable but not fulfilled. You normalize a level of output that is far below what you are capable of, and eventually that becomes your baseline. And Pluto refuses to let that continue. It forces you to confront the gap between what you have accepted and what you are actually capable of. And that confrontation can feel harsh because it removes the comfort of familiarity. But it also gives you something incredibly valuable: clarity. And if you wake up in this energy and suddenly see that your work is draining you, that your daily habits are suppressing your creativity, that your financial choices are disconnected from your true priorities, that is not something to fear. That is information you were not allowing yourself to access before, and now that you see it, you have the ability to change it. And this is where the third revelation begins to rise. And this one reaches deeper into your identity than anything else happening right now. Because on this same day, the Sun in Taurus forms a tense aspect to Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius. And this introduces a completely different layer of intensity, because Lilith represents the part of you that has never been fully accepted, the part that resists control, the instincts you were taught to suppress, the emotions you were told were too much, the desires you learned to hide in order to belong. And when the Sun, which governs your core identity, comes into tension with that energy, it creates a powerful internal conflict between the version of yourself you have been presenting to the world and the version that exists beneath all of that conditioning. And what is happening now is that the parts of you that you pushed away in order to fit in are no longer willing to stay silent. They are returning to your awareness, not gently, but with intensity, asking to be acknowledged, asking to be integrated. And this can show up as sudden realizations about how much of your life has been shaped by external expectations. Moments where you recognize that you have been agreeing to things that do not align with you, that you have been minimizing yourself to keep the peace, that you have been following paths that no longer make sense to who you are becoming, and that awareness can feel uncomfortable because it brings you face to face with emotions you may have avoided for a long time. Feelings of guilt, fear of rejection, the memory of being judged or misunderstood when you expressed these parts of yourself in the past. And that is why they were pushed away to begin with. Because at some point you were taught that being fully yourself came with consequences, that certain aspects of your nature were not acceptable, that your intensity, your independence, your authenticity needed to be controlled. And now those parts are returning, not to create chaos, but to restore balance. And this is where the real challenge begins, because integrating those aspects requires you to let go of the version of yourself that was built on approval and step into something far more honest. And that process is not comfortable. It is raw. It is emotional. It forces you to question everything you thought you had settled. And yet, it is also the moment where something powerful begins to emerge. Because when you stop rejecting parts of yourself, when you allow your full identity to exist without suppression, you step into a level of alignment that changes how you move through the world. And that is where everything begins to shift in a way that cannot be undone. What is being uncovered here may feel unsettling at first, but if you stay with it long enough, you begin to realize something that changes everything. The sense of safety you have been trying to create by suppressing parts of yourself was never real. To begin with, it was a temporary shield, something you constructed to navigate expectations and avoid rejection. But true stability does not come from hiding it. It comes from fully owning who you are, even the parts that do not match the image you have been trying so carefully to maintain. And this is where the deeper layer of this moment reveals itself, because Lilith in Sagittarius is not quiet. It does not negotiate with belief systems that feel false. It does not conform to rules that contradict lived experience. It represents the instinct within you that demands truth, that refuses to stay confined within boundaries that were never yours to begin with. And if you feel something rising today, something restless, something bold, something that pushes you to speak what you have been holding back, to question structures you once accepted, without thinking, to finally acknowledge desires you have been minimizing, that is not random impulse. That is a part of you returning after being pushed aside for far too long. And it may not arrive gently. It may come with intensity, with urgency, with a sense that you cannot ignore it anymore. And while it might be tempting to shut it down, to dismiss it as too disruptive or too risky, this is exactly where your creative power lives, in the parts of you that were never fully expressed. And I'm not telling you to destroy everything you have built in a single moment. But I am asking you to listen closely to what is surfacing, because within it is information about who you are becoming. And the more you deny it, the more tension you create within yourself. But the more you allow it to exist, even without acting on it immediately, the more integrated you become. And this is where something supportive enters the picture, in a way that changes how this entire experience unfolds. Because just 3 hours before Mercury reaches that exact square to Pluto, the Moon moves into Capricorn. And this is not a small detail. Capricorn brings structure, it brings discipline, it brings a grounded awareness that allows you to step back and assess rather than react impulsively. And that means that even as these truths surface, even as emotions intensify, you are not left without stability. You have access to a part of yourself that can hold everything without collapsing under the weight of it. A part that can organize the chaos, separate what matters from what does not, and begin to think strategically about what to do next. And that is incredibly important, because without that grounding influence, this could feel overwhelming. But with it, you are able to process instead of panic, to observe instead of react, to take what is being revealed, and begin to integrate it in a way that actually supports your growth. And then something even more significant happens, just 32 minutes after Mercury completes. That square with Pluto, it forms a sextile to the North Node in Pisces, and this is where the meaning behind all of this becomes clear. Because the North Node represents the direction your life is meant to evolve toward, it is not always comfortable, but it is always purposeful. And what this connection shows is that everything being revealed, no matter how intense it feels in the moment, is aligned with that path. It is not random disruption. It is guidance. It is clearing space for something more aligned to emerge. And when you see it from that perspective, the entire experience shifts. It is no longer something happening against you. It becomes something happening in your favor, even if it does not feel that way at first. And I want to be honest with you, because this is not an easy moment. You may have conversations that challenge you. You may see aspects of yourself or others that are difficult to accept. You may feel like the stability you relied on is suddenly uncertain, but none of that means you are not capable of handling it. In fact, the very fact that this is coming into your awareness now means you are ready for it. And from everything I've observed over time, the difference in how this energy plays out comes down to one thing: resistance or openness. Those who try to hold everything in place, who refuse to look at what is being shown, who attempt to maintain control by denying reality, they tend to experience more friction, more prolonged difficulty. Because what is trying to change does not stop just because it is ignored. It builds until it forces a shift. But those who allow themselves to see clearly, who are willing to sit with discomfort and ask what it is trying to show them, they move through it differently. They experience release. They break patterns that have been repeating for years. They step into a level of authenticity that changes how they relate to everything around them. And that is why the most powerful thing you can do right now is not to have all the answers, but to remain open. To let what is being revealed speak to you without immediately shutting it down. Because this moment is not here to take something from you. It is here to return something that has always belonged to you. There comes a moment in this kind of energy where you realize you can no longer hold everything together the way you used to, and instead of trying to contain it, you are being asked to let it unfold. So if something uncomfortable rises within you today, do not rush to silence it. If a realization surfaces that challenges the version of yourself you have been holding on to, do not reject it. Allow it to exist long enough for you to understand what it is trying to show you. And if a conversation needs to happen, even if your voice shakes, even if you're unsure how it will be received, this is the moment to speak, because what is being asked of you now is not perfection, it is honesty. And that honesty begins with your willingness to acknowledge when your reality no longer matches the story you have been telling yourself. And I know that can feel destabilizing, because it means letting go of certainty. It means stepping into a space where things are still forming. But what exists on the other side of that space is something far more aligned with who you truly are. And I genuinely believe that there is a version of you waiting beyond this threshold that feels more grounded in truth, more connected to your real desires, more powerful in the way you move through your life. But reaching that version requires you to pass through this moment of exposure first. And if fear shows up, if your instinct is to pull back or retreat, understand that this is part of the process. Transformation is not meant to feel comfortable. Pluto does not operate through ease. It operates through depth, through intensity, through the kind of shifts that require you to release what is no longer real and that can feel intimidating. But it also means you are being invited into something meaningful, and what may help you hold that weight is the awareness that you are not moving through this alone. There are countless others standing in this same moment, facing their own truths, navigating their own realizations. And there is something quietly powerful about that shared experience. Because even though each journey is personal, the collective movement creates a sense of connection that makes the process feel less isolating. And as intense as this may feel right now, there is a point beyond it where everything begins to settle, where clarity replaces confusion, where understanding replaces resistance, and that is the space you are moving toward. But before we reach that, there is one more layer to acknowledge, because the impact of this moment does not end. Today, Pluto shifts into retrograde the very next day. And that changes the direction of everything that has just been revealed. Because once Pluto turns inward, the focus moves away from external events and into your internal world. Which means that whatever comes to light now is not something you process once and leave behind it, becomes material for a deeper ongoing transformation that unfolds over the next several months. And that is important to understand, because it sets the expectation that this is not about immediate resolution, it is about integration. It is about taking what you see now and allowing it to reshape how you understand yourself over time. Retrograde energy asks you to go inward, to revisit, to reflect, to sit with what has been uncovered and slowly weave it into your awareness. And while that may sound heavy, there is also something reassuring in it, because real change is not meant to happen all at once. Real healing requires space. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to move through layers rather than rush to a conclusion. And so as you move through today and whatever it brings, I want you to approach yourself with a level of care that matches the depth of what you're experiencing. Give yourself permission to not have everything figured out immediately. Allow yourself to feel without judgment, and trust that what is emerging is not random. It is aligned with your growth, even if it does not make sense yet. And if you are still here absorbing all of this, that alone says something about your readiness. Because not everyone chooses to stay present when things become intense, and I appreciate that you are here, that you are willing to engage with this level of awareness. And if any part of this resonates with you, if you find yourself moving through a realization, a conversation, or a shift that feels significant, I encourage you to share it, because there is value in expressing what you are experiencing. There is strength in recognizing that others are navigating similar terrain. And as you continue through this day, carry this with you. Be courageous in facing what arises. Be truthful in how you respond to it. And remember that while the truth may feel uncomfortable in the moment, it is also the force that creates freedom, and that freedom is what allows you to step fully into the next version of yourself.